go here. Welcome to the first edition of the Racer's Edge, brought to you in conjunction with F1 Racing Magazine, live from the offices of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation in Melbourne, on St Kilda Road, Melbourne. Actually, we're walking to the studio this morning, the makeshift studio that we have. Several Formula One mechanics are out there jogging and already soaking in the Australian beautiful fresh air of a lovely dawn. Bit cooler today as well, which is good news for all the mechanics out at the track. And I speak of the track because we're very near the Albert Park circuit. Melbourne is abuzz at the moment. The Grand Prix is being perfectly utilised, I would say, by the Grand Prix Corporation in every aspect, whether it be the arrival of the freight on Monday and looking at the cars being unloaded. I think Ricciardo's Toro Rosso was the first off the truck. Whether it be the launching of the new Grid Girls outfits, aided and abetted by Daniel Ricciardo on the river nearby, or whether it's the celebrities over at sweltering Sandown Park practicing for the Mazda 6 Challenge, which is going to be one of the main features of the weekend. A packed weekend. It all starts tomorrow, Thursday, here in Melbourne. I'm working for GPTV here, and I've got to say my production schedule, even for today, Wednesday, is huge. So lots going on, and that all adds up, in my view, to probably the best Grand Prix of the year in terms of it being a case study on how to promote and run a Formula One race 2013 style. And in that context, I couldn't have a better guest with me to start the Racer's Edge, and that is Andrew Westacott, the CEO of the Australian Grand Prix Corporation. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today. I know you've got a busy morning, day ahead of you. In fact, you've got an interesting meeting just about to come up, right?
Yeah, a bit of everything, because we've just transformed the park. So Albert Park, just 3 kilometres from the CBD in Melbourne, is now the Albert Park Grand Prix circuit. And got a meeting this morning with Parks Victoria, who essentially is our landlord for that wonderful park, and we close it down for 7 days of the year. And for the rest of the time, you mentioned joggers. I go jogging around there on the morning, and it's a great way to actually inspect the track prior to the final finishing touches being put onto the opening race of the season.
Well, Melbourne, we kind of take it for granted now. It's on the calendar. It's one of the great Grand Prix circuits. But I guess every year you refine it a little bit and a little bit more, because it must be so complex staging a semi-public road course event in a city like this.
Oh, we do, and we're a competitive bunch down under, and what we do is not only benchmark ourselves against other Grand Prix around the world, but we also benchmark ourselves and want to make sure that we put on a better event than our buddies over at the Australian Open Tennis and the people who hosted the President's Cup a couple of years ago. So every time we're raising the bar, and then we want to make sure that when all the teams, and they've been arriving, get a better experience this year than they did last year. There's 290,000 man hours that go into building the circuit.
It's just amazing, and as I say, we do take that for granted. But what I love about coming here are the little details, and I just mentioned some of them, that you pick out of the Grand Prix weekend, and you really make it something for the local media, and indeed for the international media who are now arriving. And we don't really see that at other races.
Well, I just got told there is a lot going on. We're a staff of 50 at the Grand Prix Corporation, but we probably have 12 or 15,000 people working across the event. But one of the great things I heard this morning for the international media, and this is a bit of a scoop, Friday night they're going to have a couple of Australian native animals, a little Australian crocodile and a wombat, of all things, are going to be there for the international media to meet and introduce themselves to one another.
Well, where's that going to be? I'm very into wombats, I've got to say. I met one in Sydney called Matilda, I think, and she was in great form. She ran out of her little hut and said hello, and then ran back in again in the middle of the day, which I think gathers quite unusual.
Well, I don't know that Matilda and the crocodile are friends, but they're going to be in the International Media Centre. So we set up everything on a temporary basis, and at the moment we're just doing the final sort of zhuzhing and tweaking of everything from the Formula One paddock to a schools expo to an industry expo. And you mentioned the Mazda Celebrity Challenge. We have a big on-track and off-track program in Melbourne, which is a bit different to some of the overseas events.
The Mark Webber over the years has said that he would like to cut back a little bit on the amount of promotional work he does, and we know he's a great guy and he does a lot, but he must be reasonably happy, I would think, that he's got young Daniel Ricciardo doing quite a lot of this stuff that's going on. And Daniel's doing a good job, eh? He's loving it.
Well, I tell you what, he arrives at the country. He spent the weekend down at Lorne on the Great Ocean Road, where we put a Formula One car a couple of weeks ago. I think he had a bit of a surf, but yesterday he arrived, as you saw, on the riverbank outside Crown Casino. with 7 or 8 of the Rolex Grid Girls, who are our title sponsors. So it was a tough morning for Daniel, but he enjoyed it.
And I saw a quote from you. I presume some of the Aussie journalists said, so why aren't they in bikinis? And there was something from you along the lines of, well, I think they're in an outfit very befitting the nature of the brand of our major sponsor, which is always very diplomatic.
Stylish. Well, they are. They're stylish, tasteful and elegant, and they've got a very ever so subtle Rolex brand across the tit for tat, the hat.
Yeah, well, we better not use too many phrases like that as we're talking about the Grid Girls. But Andrew, the race, we know that there's negotiation going on, and I gather there's a little bit of political turmoil in Victoria at the moment with the Premier being ousted or replaced.
Well, he stepped down from office, and we've got a new, it remains the same party, the Liberal National Party coalition, and we have a new Premier, Dr. Dennis Napthine, and he'll be attending the event on the weekend along with the official welcome at Government House on Thursday night and our Grand Prix breakfast. So the government, both sides of Parliament, in fact, are strong supporters of the event because it forms part of a very strong major events calendar that allows Melbourne to compete against a lot of other Grand Prix towns and cities, whether it's Singapore, the UK, or Abu Dhabi. We've got to be up there and play on a global stage.
Which you do incredibly well. I've just written a column in F1 Racing magazine about how I think the Australian Grand Prix is so integrated now into the Formula One calendar that, along with races like the French Grand Prix, which sadly we don't have, some of them belong on the calendar, and maybe Formula One as an economy needs sometimes to take that into account. And I know that negotiations are going to be tough for the next stage, but what's your gut feeling about the future?
Well, the contract for Melbourne is in place until 2015, and the government will undertake those negotiations in late 13, early 14 sort of thing. There's no real rush, but what you say about character events I think holds true. You look at it from a golfing point of view. You can have all the events you like in desert courses, but you've got to have things like the British Open on a links course in Scotland, and you've got to have things like Melbourne with the crowds and the lake and the CBD and the environment we have.
And just talking about that, and not in the context of this is a race that we got to keep on the calendar, but I saw a quote from you also saying that revenues are up this year, and that's quite an achievement because we're still not out of the world global recession. I think it was the WGR or something that the Australians call it out here. They've actually got a diminutive for it, but yeah, numbers looking quite good so far for this year's race.
The GFC, the Global Financial Crisis. We love our acronyms. But we've had 7 to 8% growth year on year for the last 3 years, and we're going to have bigger crowds, bigger revenues from a corporate grandstand and touchwood general admission point of view, because we're now in general admission sales phase with only a couple of days to go. But we've got new facilities, we've got a new grandstand named after Sebastian Vettel at Turn 4 Right, and we're offering, in fact, interestingly, we're seeing people buying into premium areas because they want that little bit of value add, whether it's in a general admission area or an undercover grandstand with access to different beverage and catering options. Well,
that is interesting, isn't it? Because I know that is kind of the philosophy of the Formula One industry in general. They're not cutting back on paddock club prices, for example. In fact, in some cases, they're putting them up. And it's interesting, isn't it, that people at this time do still pay for premier events?
They do, but what we've found in Melbourne, because we've got such a great level of infrastructure and we love our sport, is there's a lot of offerings there in permanent facilities. Yeah. So what we've got to make sure is there's investment in the facilities, in the product offerings, but also at the low end, make sure that we've got value for the fans out there. So children 12 and under free is part of the action across the weekend, and we've got a free Thursday it's called Heritage Day to pay recognition to the fact that the first Australian Grand Prix in Albert Park was held there in 1953.
And absolutely wonderful footage we got from the corporation of the Maybach coming out, and Alan Jones renewing his ties with that car that his dad raced.
Yeah.
How many fans will you have here tomorrow, do you reckon, Thursday?
Look, I don't know. We normally get about 40,000 on a Thursday, which is great without any Formula One action on track, apart from the speed comparison, which has got our Casey Stoner racing in it this year. Look, I think it's going to be a bit over that, given that we've got a free admission day, but it'll all depend on the weather, and we've done a lot to promote it. So I expect them to be there not only Thursday, but some big crowds on the weekend to see Daniel and Mark.
Yeah. Well, let's hope, speaking of Mark, he's sitting there behind you, or standing there behind you. G'day, Mark. I'm sure he'd like us to say that he's looking good, and I think he is. I mean, what's your gut feeling? He comes into this race the last 3 or 4 years with a winning car, no question about that. He just needs a few things to go right.
He does, and the great thing is he got his best result ever in Melbourne last year as 4th, and Daniel snuck into the top 10. They have a lot of pressure on them. They've got commitments to the team sponsors, to their own sponsors. Mark and Daniel give their time generously to the corporation, and but I also think that each of them, they get into that zone, and like any Aussie sportsman or any sportsman preparing for something, they got to make sure that they're on song for the big race, and that's what Mark's doing this year, no doubt.
Well, that earpiece falling out was, I think, your assistant Laura over there just shouting at you saying, we've got to get going. So with that, Andrew, I'll say big thank you to you for joining us, and best of luck for the weekend. You don't really need any luck. This Grand Prix is just brilliant, and I know it'll be a big success. We're getting Blackjack Brabham and Alan Jones along as well, I think, aren't we?
We are. Jack's 86, and Alan's a lot younger than that, he tells me, but they're both going to be there, and we're unveiling 2 bronze busts to recognise their achievements as our 2 world champions. So Jack 3 years in the 50s and 60s, and Alan obviously winning with Williams in 1980.
Superb stuff. Can't wait. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
Pleasure,
and very best of luck. You got a few bits to unclip there, but I'll leave you to do that and flick to my camera here while you get along, mate. So yeah, thank you very much indeed to Andrew for joining us there. As you can tell, there's a buzz about this place that isn't going to go away for the next 4 days, and I'm lucky enough, as I say, to be working for Grand Prix TV here at the Australian Grand Prix, the Rolex Australian Grand Prix. I'll be in the pit lane, and they've got me doing not only Formula One but also Aussie V8, which is going to be quite interesting. Not knowing that much about it, but being a big fan of Aussie V8s and the way they run the championship. The Clipsal, I don't know if anybody here would have, watching this show, would have seen the Clipsal race in Adelaide last week, but brilliant entertainment from beginning to end. Anyway, lots to talk about on the Formula One side, but before we do that, let me turn on my iPad here, brand new iPad, and hopefully we're going to get to TRE live and have a look at, well, let me just say a big thank you, I put on my specs here, to everybody who's been supporting the show. It's begun, well, because I actually don't know if it's actually gone out live, because I haven't got anybody in my ear at the moment. I'm only listening, got the headset in because I want to be able to hear what some of our guests are saying on the media files we have. So it's good to know, thank you very much, cool graphics here. Yeah, anyway, let me know what you think as it's going along. I think we are hunky-dory, watching Peter Windsor's new show. Good, there we are. Right, what I'm getting around to saying is that Craig Scarborough, I think most of you know from our previous show, has been entrenched in what we do. He's a great guy in every sense of the word, but technically in terms of his observation of Formula One cars and what is going on out there. Is there anyone better? Well, probably not. Not that relates to the fans in the way Craig does. He's got a great website too. So I spoke to Craig just a couple of days ago, post the Barcelona third test, to see what his take was on all the Formula One cars. This recording goes on now for about 23 minutes. I'll probably stop it about halfway through to have a look at the TRE live feed on Twitter, but sit back and enjoy. I began by asking Craig really where we ended up after the Barcelona test, that final test, and what he thinks is going to happen in Melbourne. So let's see what Craig had to say.
To suggest that maybe they're a bit hard on tyres, so they were able to get the softs working so much quicker on these short runs where they set these blistering fast times. But when we drilled into some of the
slight audio issue there, let me try this again. I think what I'm going to do is remove the file and then come back and add the media file, which should work. We've gone through this a little bit. This is the one glitch we've had so far in preparation for this. Let me just try it again, and if we don't get Craig an audio, I will jump to another one and we'll see what
longer
happens
runs
there.
they did.
Now we seem to be getting the same problem. Let me have a look on this one, see if it's any different. Sorry about that. Coming back to me now. You're all wondering what I'm doing at the moment. I'm actually playing with some amazing software that we have of from YouTube, which is superb. And if there's any glitch here, it's me. It's not the YouTube thing.
Certainly suffering.
Now, for some reason, I can't get this to
the other
play now, the Craig Scarborough one. So what I'm going to do now is have a look at the I'm actually going to remove all, sorry, I shouldn't do that. You shouldn't get a blank screen. Bear with me here. What I'm going to do is remove all the media from my from the list here that I've got. And I'm going to re-add Craig. I can't understand why this isn't going to play as well as it should. Okay, now let's have a look.
The opinion up and down the pit lane is that Mercedes really have made
no,
a big step with the car
what I
this
might
year.
do,
Whether that's enough
and this is annoying for you live viewers, what I'm going to do is actually put up.
They've stepped up towards the.
Sorry, what I'm going to do is actually put up the TRE logo, and I'm just going to sort this out while we can, and get the file sorted, so when it goes out as something you can download, it'll all be okay. But I apologise for this slight glitch. For some reason, I don't seem to be able to get the Craig Scarborough thing. I'll tell you what I'm going to try to do now. I actually recorded another interview with Chris Amon, the phenomenally successful, well, I wouldn't say phenomenally successful, incredibly quick Grand Prix driver. Sadly, never won a Grand Prix, who won the Tasman Series in '69, so he knows all about racing here in the Antipodes, and he had a brilliant duel with Jim Clark in the '68 Australian Grand Prix at Sandown Park here in Victoria. He talks about that, and also the 1963 Australian Grand Prix, which was held at Warwick Farm in very, very hot conditions. So let's just have a look and see if the Chris Amon media file is happy to play. If not, then I'm going to come into a mode where we're going to need to just rejig things slightly.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
No, we don't have any audio either for that, so
especially at this time of year.
We don't have any audio either for that, so I'm afraid what I'm going to do now is put up the TRE logo, and we're going to try and sort this and come back to you very shortly, so don't go away. I'm really sorry about this.
Top three teams and suppose, top 3 plus Lotus, there's now going to be a group of 5 cars that are going to be very competitive with each other.
Right, sorry about that. I've just spoken to our production team in England. I'm really sorry for all these glitches. It shouldn't be like this, but anyway, it's me. It's not anybody else but me. Right, I can't actually hear the audio from Craig. That's the problem, whereas I think all you could. So on that basis, let's go ahead with the video and enjoy.
As conditions change over the first few races.
Just in a nutshell, can you just remind us the 2013 Mercedes compared with the 2012 Mercedes? Where's the big change visually and structurally and aerodynamically?
Well, if you looked at it at first glimpse, you would probably say that the car hasn't changed at all. It looks very similar. There's lots of concepts that have carried over between the two cars. One of the key things is that the W04, the new Mercedes, has gone with a Coan type exhaust system. This is giving them lots more downforce, and both drivers said that they've got lots of rear downforce, lots of grip in the faster corners, and that's probably one of the key things that they've changed. They've also been doing a lot more work around the suspension, both in terms of the geometry of the wishbones and how it works with the tyres. They seem to have much more of a handle on this. Obviously, for the past few years, tyre degradation has been a massive issue for Mercedes, as well as this downforce issue that they've had. Got an all-new front wing, which has got 5 elements as on the main outer parts of the wing, plus all these cascadey and flappy bits mounted above it. So they've made a step with the aerodynamics. It's much more of a contemporary car than it being a bit of a side road which they've driven down over the past few years. One of the biggest questions that we've not got answered with the new Mercedes is the inboard elements of the suspension. For the past 2 years, Mercedes have run a hydraulic system of suspension that links the front and the rear suspension and the suspension left to right, and it's a kind of a passive active type suspension, if we could ever call it that. They may have reverted to a more conventional springs, dampers, anti-roll bars, heave dampers, inerters, all the other bits and pieces. We just don't know. We've not been able to get close enough to the car to find out. So potentially one of the big changes that they've got in order to make better use of the tyres is either they've resolved the issues with this interlinked system, or they have just reverted to a more conventional system. So we'll be having a really close look at the car when it gets stripped in the garages at Melbourne.
McLaren, what are your thoughts on McLaren as we saw it at the end of the Barcelona test relative to the launch car?
McLaren's not really changed massively. They've introduced a new front wing. They already had a kind of an interim wing on the car when it was launched, which is very much like the wing they ran at Austin. McLaren have run this rather strange step set up on the front wing, so you've almost got one wing section in front of the tyres, and then the wing steps and changes into a completely different profile in between the front tyres, which is very clever and is very good at managing the airflow around the front tyres, which is one of the key things the front wing does, as well as adding downforce. But they've then changed to a much simpler wing. It's like the main front profile of the wing is almost completely flat. So they're obviously moving away from some of this more complicated stuff they've been doing. And the car seems to have natural pace. I mean, the car, it's a quick car, but they've changed the car a lot from last year. And one of the things that came out of the final test is that McLaren are struggling to understand the car. They're struggling to find the setups, and they're struggling to find the ways to make the car do what the driver wants to do. And as we know, a driver like Jenson Button's very sensitive to setup. And one of the key changes that McLaren has made, it seems to be actually exacerbating this problem. If you remember when we was in the McLaren Technical Centre when the car was launched, we were talking about the pull rod front suspension and how it's so much better for aerodynamics. One of the problems that this suspension setup has, that it puts the springs and the dampers and all the other mechanical bits of the suspension low down in the front footwell of the car, And what it turns out is that the mechanics are actually having trouble to access these parts in the car. And when Jensen or Sergio brings the car in to have a setup change, it's taken about 45 minutes in the garage to change things, which would be far quicker. So not only have they got a car that they're struggling to understand, but it's also taken them a long time to make the changes for the driver to get back out there and do more practice. And obviously when this comes to free practice, where you've only got a 90-minute session, you can't afford to be spending 45 minutes in the garage. So McLaren, if they get the setup right, are going to be really quick, and potentially have got one of the best cars out there. But it could be sensitive, and it could be a little bit inconsistent over the first few races.
I'd love to eavesdrop some conversations between Pete Vale, who's now back at McLaren. He was chief mechanic, and he was back at base in 2012, but now back on the race team again. And Ugo, the chief mechanic at Ferrari, to see what they both got to say about that front suspension layout and the changes they have to make. But we were never conscious, I don't think, were we, of the Ferraris having to spend longer in the garage for suspension setup work in 2012?
It wasn't something that we were immediately aware of, but Ferrari made an aerodynamic change to the car halfway through the season, and previously they had turning vanes under the nose, and these turning vanes were actually attached to the nose cone. So when they took the nose cone off in the garage, all of these turning vanes came off with it and were out of the way of the car. But what Ferrari did mid-season is they put these kind of curved vanes which bolt underneath the front suspension, literally underneath the chassis, not on the nose box. And what they were finding is they were having to take these pieces off in order to access parts of the front suspension. And it became apparent as we were constantly getting photos of mechanics holding these turning vanes, and I couldn't understand why these mechanics were always seemed to have a pair of turning vanes in their hand. Pat Fry said over the winter that while they were going to keep the pull rod front suspension, they were going to repackage it to make it slightly easier to work on. So Ferrari were having issues last year, and McLaren appear not to have learnt from this. And lo and behold, at the last test, McLaren had been running these curved vanes underneath the front of the chassis in the first two tests. And at this last test, they initially slimmed them down to just a really very small pair of vanes. And then they took those vanes off completely and fitted back some very old-fashioned ones which fitted underneath the nose cone again. Yeah, so there is a problem, and surprisingly, access is now starting to create problems with aerodynamics, that they're having to take off parts and put slightly less efficient parts on just in order to be able to resolve some of the mechanical problems that they've got.
And just before we go on to Ferrari in detail, Scarbs, setup obviously is a catchword, always has been. But what's your general take on the Pirellis and the one-lap pace? The lap times are very quick, of course, but beyond that, just fill us in on your thoughts on degradation and how that's going to pan out.
I mean, that's probably going to be the biggest story for certainly for the first flyaway races, maybe even for the first of the few European races, particularly when we see the super softs appear, which I think they are in Melbourne and probably again somewhere like Monaco. One lap pace is fantastic. I mean, the tyres are really giving the cars a lot more performance, but the degradation is bad. We've had all sorts of different weather over the testing, and I've never seen inside shoulders of tyres looking as ragged as they did at Barcelona. Some of the tyres looked in a really bad way, and I think teams are going to struggle if the weather and the track conditions go against their setup and they start to hurt these tyres. It's really going to damage their races, and some drivers, if they just end up with a problem with the car in the race, could be facing a lot more pit stops than they were envisaging.
Well, and as Pirelli keep reminding us, they've been given a brief to try and have at least 3 pit stops per race, so we're heading in that direction.
I mean, definitely we're going to have more pit stops generally anyway, particularly when we're on the softer compounds or where the weather goes against and drops the tyres one side or the other out of their operating window if it gets too hot or it gets too cold. Obviously, Barcelona started out being very cold, and the tyres were literally tearing as they slid slightly on because they were under temperature. And they were getting degradation from cold temperatures, which is something you don't often get.
Well, let's talk about the Ferrari and how quick a car it is. It looks pretty good. I mean, Fernando is there or thereabouts in most conditions, it appeared anyway.
I think Ferrari have caught up with the other teams. Again, we keep talking about the top three. I think last year, clearly, Ferrari started the season on the back foot. They were having all sorts of problems with the cars. It took them a long time to develop the car to the stage where they'd caught up with everyone else. I think, and this seems to be consistent across all teams this year, no one has turned up with a bad car this year. Everyone is there or thereabouts where you would expect. The car's working the way they expect it to. And Ferrari are very much like that. The car's quick. They have some tyre degradation issues, but again, that's something that Barcelona was throwing up because of its rough surface, because of the fast corners, and because of the differences in weather. So we may have to see when we get to hopefully the heat of Melbourne, whether Ferrari do have rear tyre degradation issues. And Yamashima was spending a lot of time looking at tyres with his notepad after the sessions at Barcelona. And that's probably the biggest worry. I think apart from that, the Ferrari clearly has got the pace. It seems to be quite well balanced. I mean, the drivers have to work it a little bit harder than maybe some of the other cars, suggesting either they're struggling for balance or perhaps downforce. But they're certainly in the ballpark, and again, it's a race-winning, potentially championship-winning car, just as the Red Bull and McLaren, possibly the Lotus and Mercedes are as well.
Well, let's have a look at the Red Bull and the Lotus. Both of them, the Lotus particularly, looked very quick early on. Didn't finish with a flourish, but again, we shouldn't read too much into that.
No, Lotus have had an awful lot of problems through testing. They've had electronics issues with the new McLaren ECU that meant that which affected other teams, but particularly affected Lotus, that they couldn't do longer runs because they just didn't have the telemetry to find out what the car was doing, and they didn't want to risk anything failing that they couldn't monitor. They've had a couple of gearbox changes and a few other problems in the garage along the time. So we've not seen them out on track as much as that we would like. But the car really does look good on track. It's good on the longer runs. It seems to be suffering far less with degradation. Lotus have obviously got this new side pod exhaust concept working, which is very much a copy of the Red Bulls. All of this talk about engine mappings doesn't appear to have stymied their pace. So Lotus are looking really strong, and we'll probably talk at some point about potential world champions this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if they do have the reliability that a Lotus will be challenging for the championship at the end of the season.
Well, good to hear. Lots of Kimi and Romain Grosjean fans out there, obviously. And how about Red Bull? Seem to lose a bit of track time in Barcelona with various issues.
Yeah, they weren't doing half as many runs as perhaps we would expect them to, and they were incredibly secretive, from the car's launch and even through testing, bringing the car straight into the garage, covering it with barriers, all sorts of shenanigans going on with the team there, just trying to keep the car away from everybody's eyes. From what I could see, the car is still very much a post Rio RB8. It's almost an RB8B rather than the RB9. We haven't seen any of these big new pieces coming on, but from what we have seen in the car on track, and Red Bull are sandbagging. They don't go out for blinding speed at any point during testing, but the car looks good. Again, the safe money has to be on them for wins in the first races and for the championship. It's sad to say. I was hoping that the car may be something a bit more exciting design-wise, but it really is very much a progression of what we've seen over the past year or two.
Williams, talking to the drivers the other day, they're saying the traction of that car is just brilliant, even relative to last year. So that's a good sign.
Yeah. Yeah, again, I mean, they made a big step last year from the problems of 2011, and they seem to have made another step again this year. The car was already quick in in the second test and in the first few days of the last test. Then they changed their rear bodywork, and they've gone for this Red Bull style tunneled Coanda type side pod. And speaking to Pastor at the end of the day, it's like, does the car feel better in the slow corners? And he's saying, well, the car feels better in the fast corners, it feels better in the slow corners, on corner entry, on corner exit. It's really brought the car alive, and it's going to be really interesting to see quite where they end up pitching, because that they could be snapping at Lotus and Mercedes heels if the car does seem to have this pace. And again, if it's good on tyres, which it appears to, it means that potentially it could be a very good race car for their two drivers.
And where do you see Force India slotting in?
Force India haven't really shown the pace outright or on longish runs, but they've been very consistent, they've been very reliable, they've really got a handle on the car. I think that they're going to probably won't have the same peaks and troughs as some of the other midfield teams. I think they're going to be fairly stable throughout the season. And if they can keep pumping money into the car's development, they should be in a good position for, lots of points finishes on the right days, potentially podiums. But they should have a really solid run through the championship this year. Things do look very good for them in that respect.
And they were, I mean, last year we should remember they were leading the Brazilian Grand Prix. They finished the season on a great high. Do you not see them then sustaining that sort of level? Do you see them anywhere near Williams, for example?
I don't think they've got that level of pace. I don't think they're going to be as outright quick in qualifying or on fastest lap times as maybe Williams, which seem to be sort of leading that pack, maybe with Sauber. But again, as I say, I think it's going to be their consistency and reliability, plus two fairly good drivers, particularly in changeable conditions. That's going to bring them, I think, that greater victory at the end of the year rather than potentially jumping to get that one-off podium or win. I think it's going to be consistency for them this year.
Well, let's talk about Sauber because great hopes for Sauber in terms of where they finished and again what they can produce this year. Nico Hülkenberg, what are your thoughts on that car?
I mean, with the car, I mean, I spent quite a bit of time peering through the barriers at Sauber and speaking to Willem Toet and watching the car on track and just getting as many pictures as I could. The car is an absolute delight design-wise. There's so many little bits and pieces on it. They've also been testing one of these drag reduction devices, this passive DRS system. There's a few more bits and pieces to come on the car. Some of them won't be quite as visual as others. But the whole concept of the car just looks fantastic. I'm not convinced, a bit like last year, that the car is perhaps as fast as the design would suggest. I don't think we've really seen that kind of outright pace for them in testing, but that's testing. I'm hoping at the races, and again, if they can have this tyre management, which they were so good with last year, that they are going to start to challenge for those wins like they did last year when everything falls right for them, and they should have a really solid year this year. I'm just hoping that they really do have just some underlying pace there because it's a fantastic looking car.
Well, is there a eureka positioning of a component which has allowed Willem to get the side pods to be so compact and to be so low the way he's got them? How's he done that packaging? I
think what they've done, I mean, the side pods are very different, as you say. I mean, for people that maybe haven't had a good look at the Sauber side pods, probably about 12-15 centimetres narrower at the front than everybody else's, and that's where the inlet for the side pods that sends the air to the radiators go. So why they actually look particularly narrow, I think it's what he's done is actually moved the volume of the side pods around. So whereas most people have got lots of undercut to the side pod and all the volume is up high, what Sauber have done is actually moved most of the volume lower down and brought the top half to become much narrower. This should reduce the drag of the car, but I think the most important thing they've been doing with this is actually trying to get more airflow to hit the top of the exhaust outlets, which, as we know, drives more airflow down to the diffuser for more downforce. So I don't think the side pod's perhaps as small as everyone takes them for, because it's just the big visual entrance to the side pods at the front that people are looking at. They're a little bit bulkier around the back, and then obviously, like everyone else's, they slim in a lot. So I think they're just playing about with the side pod concept, and it's really interesting, and hopefully they'll make a couple of evolutions of that as the season goes on, and we'll really be able to understand exactly where the air is going over this side pod setup.
Scarbs, let's just wind up relatively quickly with the remaining teams. Toro Rosso
did lots and lots of running. The car looked balanced. I don't think, again, a bit like Force India, I don't think they've got the outright pace. But the car was utterly reliable. You obviously got James Key running it, who was a very safe pair of hands. The car will be mechanically reliable and it will be very stable aerodynamically. I think they've got quite a long year this year in actually developing the car and actually bringing pace out of it, because it's a lot more conventional than the past two cars. But again, I mean, they're going to be challenging with Force India to try and be the leader of the midfield, definitely.
Caterham and Mauricia, your thoughts?
Again, when the Mauricia was launched, it looked a very odd design, and there was features on it which none of us could really get our heads around. I think some of that was parts that were carried over from a previous year, and also trying to make sure they had lots of cooling outlet area just to be safe. I was speaking to their designer John McQuillan in the paddock about the car. Lots of confidence in the team. They've changed the top bodywork or the engine cover that looked rounded and bulky when the car was launched. It's now much slimmer. They've got this, wafer thin fin running down the back of the car. It looks very impressive. They've changed the nose around a bit. They don't have the greatest budget in the world, but they do have KERS this year, and that's going to give them 2 or 3 tenths. It's really going to make them challenge Caterham much stronger this year. So Marussia are actually looking very good. I've got quite a lot more confidence for them since we finished testing. They've got a new front wing as well. They've got lots of bits and pieces going on to that car. So I think it's only now really starting its development process. Whereas Caterham again have produced very much a B specification car from last year. I believe that the monocoque may actually be the same as last year's car. Nothing new appearing on the car, but it was doing lots of running. They were giving their new drivers lots and lots of time in the car, lots of runs, lots of pit stop practice. The first few races are going to be tough for Caterham because they don't have the new aero package. The new aero package, for whatever reason, is being held off until the Spanish Grand Prix. So they've got 4 flyaway races to cope with effectively a 2012 car. So they're going to find it tough. And, I hate to say it because, that they are another one of these teams that are working really hard to bring the car up to a modern F1 standard and mature all of the design work around the car to get it up to that level. But the aero package on the car as it stands, I think, is not enough to challenge Marussia consistently over these first 4 races.
Scarbs, thanks so much for joining us and for your insight yet again. All the best to you. We'll come back to you very shortly after the Australian Grand Prix.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter.
Apologies for the slightly out of sync pictures with the voice there. I don't know if you got it your end, but that's what it was like for me. I have actually worked out what the issue was with me, and that was a mute you can have specifically for the headset and not for the mic. So hopefully that won't happen again, and apologies for the slight glitches going on there. But thank you very much for all your nice comments that have been coming through on Twitter. Aaron Cooper actually makes some interesting comments about Scarbs' words, saying that some are calling the Sauber side pods revolutionary. And he's also pointing out that Marussia have raised the nose of their car over testing. At Skeptical says, from what I hear, Lotus have a quick car but a few gremlins in the system, but I'd rather have speed than reliability at this stage. Well, I'm not sure that everybody would agree with that, but I see where you're coming from. Nothing to beat raw speed because you can always work on the reliability, of course. And as we saw with Mercedes last year, if you don't have the raw speed, very difficult to try to regain it during the course of the season. Lots more comments coming in, most of them basically saying how much they're loving the show. Well, I'm actually finding it slightly complicated, but thank you very much indeed for all those nice comments. A few matters of business before we get on to hopefully the next interview with Chris Amon, which is a very short one, but I know you'll enjoy it. I have to record the passing of 2 very dear friends, Ginny Williams, Lady Virginia Williams, as you all knew her by, a very close friend. Motorsport magazine probably put it best back in 1968 when we lost Jimmy Clark, and they said mere words cannot express our feelings, and I kind of feel that way about Ginny. She was very close to me, and what a lady in every sense of the word. What perhaps some people don't know is that when Frank had his road accident in 1986, there were many opinions offered by the hospital in which he was being treated, and indeed endorsed by quite a few Formula One luminaries, that Frank wouldn't want the life that he was going to have to lead in a wheelchair. And because of the severity of the injury, the option was given to Ginny to switch off Frank's life support machine in the London hospital. And a debate took place for about 2 days over this, and Ginny was basically a lone voice saying, no, if Frank has got his brain and he's got his ability to speak and to be the person he is, he can still run a Formula One team. And against, I have to say, a lot of people suggesting otherwise, she insisted on that. And I'll never forget that about Ginny, and everything we've seen at Williams since then. And of course, Sir Frank is an amazing person as well in every respect. I think Ginny should take much of the credit for a lovely, lovely person, and we lost her to cancer last week. I also lost a friend, Graham Howard, 2 days ago. Great Australian journalist, and I don't use that word lightly, an expert in every dimension of modern racing, but particularly of historic racing, a wonderful man, a mentor to me as I was making my way in journalism in Australia, and we lost Graham at the age of 76. So we'll miss you both, Graham and Ginny. Right, moving forward, two drivers that I'm really looking forward to seeing perform this weekend are Valtteri Botas. I think this guy is amazing, and I'm as excited about watching his debut race as I was about watching Lewis Hamilton's debut race here in Melbourne. I cannot wait to see Valtteri out there in the Williams. I know it's been a year since he raced, and he'll be a bit rusty in some respects, but this guy drives beautifully, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing that. And welcome back to Adrian Sutil as well. Nobody deserved that drive more than Sutil. I'm so pleased that he's in that Force India again, and I think given the way he drives, and my column in F1 Racing next month is going to be all about driving styles and how they're suited to high degradation Pirellis. I think Sutil is one of the guys out there who's going to be doing a very good job with tyre management, and he's very quick. As we saw in that run in Barcelona, he was on it straight away. And welcome back, Adrian, good to see you. I should mention here F1 Racing magazine. If you haven't bought the latest edition, do so please. It is the preview edition, obviously, for the 2013 season. And praise does not come higher than from the mouth of Matt Bishop, former editor of F1 Racing, dare I say in the golden days. But Matt's opinion, always highly respected in the world of motoring and publishing. Matt currently with Mclaren Formula One, of course, running their media and public relations department, communications. But Matt sent the following email, and he's given me his permission to read it out. He sent this email out to everybody involved in the latest edition of F1 Racing. He said, I think your season preview issue is totally mega. It is jam-packed with must-read features, is beautifully written, is expertly edited, is attractively designed, is logically packaged, and is effectively flat-planned. And that is that's as high as the praise gets, really, from Mr. Baton Bishop. I'm sure he's excluding me when he's talking about the beautifully written stuff. I have got a feature in this edition in which I nominate Lewis Hamilton as the guy who has as good a chance as anyone of winning the 2013 World Championship. I went for Fernando last year, lost out by 7 points, and I didn't want to state the obvious and go for Red Bull or Fernando. We all know they're going to be good. I just think Lewis has got a pretty good chance with the Mercedes engine behind him, and I think engines will be a factor this year. I don't think Mercedes are going to have a really bad car, and if he's got a half reasonable car, I think he's going to be there. And as I said in the piece, I think also Mercedes are going to be outspending most teams this year. What about the resource restriction agreement, you all ask? Well, yeah, good question. I had an email from a friend of mine who's actually out in Melbourne this week, not to do with Formula One, but he flew out on Singapore Airlines business class, and he said, cost cutting in Formula One, there are 12 Red Bull mechanics sitting in the business class section of this Singapore Airlines flight, and he just checked into the Intercontinental Hotel here in Melbourne, which is not cheap, believe me, and he said basically the entire Lotus F1 team are staying there, so forget about cost cutting. Nothing wrong with that. I'm all for mechanics being looked after and being given the cushy life that they well deserve, because nobody works harder than the team of mechanics in Formula One, particularly in the hot weather we've had here in Melbourne in the last couple of weeks. Last few days, I should say, as they're preparing the cars. But let's not have any more complaints about the cost of motor racing and how expensive it is and how we have to cut costs, because if they can spend that sort of money on that sort of stuff, we know that all the Formula One teams have got quite enough. Thank you very much. Right, now I'm going to try to see if we can get Chris Amon up and running. This is not going to be easy because I'm slightly nervous about what's going to happen. But let's have a look and see if I can bring up Christopher Arthur Amon talking. I may not get the first bit of the interview, but if I don't, he's talking about how nice it is motor racing at this time of the year in the Antipodes. Let's see what happens.
Because it kind of gets the old blood rushing when the season starts, particularly here in Australia with the sun shining. And I think it was the same for you guys. I mean, after a while you became an international Formula One driver, but always coming back to Australia and New Zealand this time of the year had a certain buzz to it.
Oh, very much so. It was always special, and it's a little bit the same now with the Melbourne being the first Grand Prix. It's sort of you wait with anticipation, really.
Chris, you had some phenomenal races in your time in Australia and New Zealand. I'm thinking particularly of that dice with Jimmy Clark in the Australian Grand Prix at Sandown Park in '68. Tell us a little bit about that race.
Yeah, that was very special, that one, Peter. It obviously has always stayed in my mind because it was actually the last race that Jimmy ever won and it was. I think we pretty much went wheel to wheel for the whole distance, and I thought I had a strategy to beat him on the last lap. Didn't quite work out. He won by a nose cone.
Well, in all fairness to you, you were in the, I think, 2.4 litre beautiful Ferrari Dino, and he was in the slightly bigger engine Cosworth DFW Lotus 49, and it was a power circuit.
It was interesting, actually. The Dino was really a Formula 2 car with a bigger engine, whereas Jimmy had a Formula 1 car with a smaller engine. But he had a lot better brakes than I had, and I was actually able to slipstream him up the start-finish straight and actually get slightly ahead. But he'd outbrake me into the first corner, and this happened lap after lap, and I shouldn't have given the game away, I guess, early on. But when I went to do it on the last lap, I pulled out of the slipstream on cue, and about that time he always changed into top gear, and this time he didn't. I heard the engine revving a bit longer, and sure enough, it was enough to keep him in front. I mean, that was what Jimmy was all about. Just brilliant.
And I'm sure you had a bit of a laugh about that after the race with him.
Absolutely.
Chris, another race that I'd just like to get your thoughts on is that 50 years ago, the 1963 Australian Grand Prix at Warwick Farm, the first Australian Grand Prix at the farm, your first race there. Jeffrey Sykes, incredibly hot day. You were in David Mackay's Cooper, qualified on the second row. Great performance. Race didn't go on that long, but just from what I remember, was virtually the first race I went to. Incredibly hot conditions.
Yes, it was, and I think that caused my finished my race for me, because I think we got fuel vaporization or something. But I do remember that race well. I remember having quite a good scrap with Bruce Mclaren for one. I think Lex Davison, John Yule. There were 4 or 5 of us together, and because myself being a 19-year-old kid, it was pretty special to run in the company of those guys, and that's another race that I'll always remember, just for that, even if just for that reason.
And David Mackay, sadly no longer with us, but influential in your career at that point, indeed influential in the career of many Australian drivers. I was chatting only yesterday to Tim Schenken, and he was saying how it was David that had encouraged him to get overseas as well, and that's where a lot of that impetus for you came from, right?
Absolutely. Both Australian and New Zealand motorsport owe David a lot. He put a tremendous amount into the sport, and it was a real credit to him that he got the results that he did. It was because he was at times stepping into the unknown a bit, and he really probably put together the first really professional race team in Australia, or in Australasia as such, really.
Chris, amazing atmosphere here as we approach the first round of the 2013 Formula One World Championship. I know you're still a relatively keen observer of the state of the art of Formula One. I just wondered your thoughts on the 2013 season and how it might pan out.
Well, I think it's going to be probably one of the closest of all time. I think you'd be a brave man that would bet against Red Bull, but I think Ferrari are probably going to be stronger this year than they were last. And Alonso, I think you've got to look pretty hard to go past him as being probably to me, probably the outstanding guy on the grid. So who knows what Mercedes are going to do? They've certainly shown good pace. And of course, McLaren are going to be right there. So it's it'd be a brave man that has a punt on this one, I think.
I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. Do you think Mark Webber can do Sebastian Vettel, assuming the Red Bull is a quick car this weekend, which I'm sure it will be? Do you think Webber can outrace Vettel?
Well, I think Mark on his day is every bit as quick as as battle. I'd love to see Mark win the Australian Grand Prix. That would be magic.
Chris, it's magic talking to you too. I know you've done put a lot of energy into the careers of young New Zealanders on the way up now. Mitch Evans, Richie Stanaway. There's a rich seam of new talent coming along there, and congratulations on the work you're doing there. Very sad for Richie that he had that accident last year. Yes,
it was a real shame because, he's got so much talent, as have Nick Cassidy, Mitch Evans. We've got an absolute wealth of talent now, but difficult times, Peter, and hard to make that final step. I'm really hoping that Mitch is going to have a outstanding GP2 year. And fingers crossed, maybe that's going to lead to something, because it's really been a long time since we've had a fellow countryman in Formula One, so I'd love to see it happen.
Chris, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you again very soon on the Racer's Edge.
My pleasure, Peter. Thank you.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Chris Amon in great form. Can you imagine Chris Amon on an iPad? I mean, this is the guy that lost the 71 Italian Grand Prix because when he went to take his strip off his helmet, when he'd broken away from the bunch, was leading the race, few laps to go, the whole visor came off his helmet. Not that that's related to iPads and technology really, but Chris had this sort of aura of being not particularly detail conscious, and yet here he is on his iPad, great connection too from Palmerston North in New Zealand. And I said to Chris, what sort of iPad have you got? He said, it's a SIM card one, but he never really uses a SIM card because he just uses a hotspot from his iPhone whenever he needs to. So this is Mr. High Tech Chris Amon now. Very impressive to see. Again, questions coming in. Thank you very much for all this. We'll just make a few comments, all very intelligent, much more too intelligent for my brain, most of these, but Aaron Cooper again, there's a bit of a discussion going on here between the two Mercedes drivers. I think the Mercedes got lots of potential. Nico will get the better of Lewis for the first couple of races. Well, that'll be interesting to see if that happens. Rish at Williams says that he's really interested to see how Lewis gets on in the Mercedes, and the Slats says at last somebody giving credit to Sutil. A lot of people have been very snooty about his return, but I'm confident he can do well. Well, I cannot imagine why anybody would be snooty about his return. You've only got to go and watch the guy drive to see how much talent he's got. And I suppose that brings me back to the point of, racing drivers drive racing cars. Let's watch them doing what they do and not judge them based on how they are in the pit lane, in the paddock area, or indeed away from the track. Of course, there's a certain code of behaviour to which we must adhere, but Adrian to me is one of these guys that drives beautifully, and he's very reflexy in some ways. He gets himself into a few situations perhaps that he should be avoiding, but that's all going to change, I think, with the year he's had, and I'll be very interested to see how he comes back and performs. Right, I want to say some thank yous here. I want to say thank you, first of all, to F1 Racing and Haymarket for getting behind the show in the way they have. It's just brilliant to have their support. And next week, we will be coming live from the Malaysian Grand Prix, Sepang, and I hope to have one of the key writers of F1 Racing with me live for that show. I don't want to promise anything yet because everybody's plans are all up in the air all the time, but I'll let you know as soon as we got that sorted. I'd also like to thank everybody at Knockout TV, our production team, because I'm not that good at all this stuff, as you can see. Hopefully I'll be better and I'll learn from all the mistakes we've made in this opening show. I'm sure we will. But in all seriousness, brilliant to have their support and to be live streaming on YouTube. Couple of emails from various parts of the world, Germany being one, saying where YouTube in Germany isn't particularly easy to watch from, which is interesting. So we'll look into that. And if you've got any comments, obviously really pleased and interested to have them after the show. The key thing for us to grow with the show is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you for everybody who's doing that. And we absolutely overloaded already with the number of people, not overloaded, but just ecstatic about the number of people who've subscribed to our new channel, which is called Peter Windsor, and also on our Facebook page. Thanks for all your support there. I'm going to keep that going, and we'll be getting some blogs coming from the F1 racing journalists on that Facebook page as well, and we'll keep in touch via Twitter. I'd also like to thank Oscar de Vries of Oscar Natural Shaving Oil, who got behind the show. I want to give their product a big mention. If you like a smooth shave, just as much as you like watching a smooth race driver like, say, Kimi Räikkönen, just plucking one name out of the sky, Oscar Natural Shaving Oil, all Australian made, is the one for you. Thanks for getting behind the show as well. So that's it. It's our hour. I must apologise again for a couple of the glitches. I think we'll be able to smooth those out when we put the edit out. Hopefully we can, because we've got some wizards behind the show, and we will be doing giving you a link for the download for the show, so you can watch it offline. I would encourage you to watch it or listen to it as an audio file rather than a video file. It's going to be much quicker to download. We are working on that. We're working on ways of improving the download system. It's a huge file, as you can imagine. So let's hope that happens. And in the medium term, I think we can see YouTube starting to allow offline viewing as well, or starting to generate offline viewing. And we all know that Google are putting a lot of effort behind their new laptop, which was announced recently, which really effectively only operates online. So that's how they see the future going. Basically, we're all going to be online 4 or 5 years from now, 24/7. Probably a bad thing, I don't know. No, a good thing, I'm sure. I'm just checking my notes to see if there's anything else I should be saying. I don't think there is. It's apart really from thanking you, the fans, for watching, for getting behind the show. We'll have a show every Wednesday, and we'll have special shows in addition coming from you from all over the world, from events as they happen. I look forward to joining you next week from Malaysia. Now I'm going to try and do a very clever close now, which involves, I think, putting up the logo of the show and then muting the input mic, and then I'm going to stop the live stream. That's how it should go. Anyway, thanks for joining. Let's hope that happens.